Thank you, Don. I'm Bill Daggett, Delta Advisory Group, a group of industry professionals throughout the U.S. in multiple verticals, try to help people understand or differentiate the signal from the noise. And with that, I will start with Alan here. We'll let the panelists go down and give a little spiel about themselves.
Good afternoon. I'm Alan Weigel from the law firm of Blank Rome. I specialize in maritime litigation, primarily casualty work, or what we call in the maritime industry, the wet work. My background is spent 20 plus years in the Navy as a submarine officer, and since becoming an attorney, one of my primary focuses has been on advising the IMO through the CMI working group on maritime autonomous surface ships. I've been doing that. Someone talked earlier about the sloth on top of the turtle. I've been doing the CMI working group since 2015. It gives you an idea how long, and we still don't have regulations, so you still give you an idea how long that process goes, but we'll be talking about that today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Heather Trosclair. I'm an attorney working in-house at a company called Fugro. We are a geology, surveying, and engineering firm, and we're international. It's a Dutch publicly traded company, but I support the North and South America region. Prior to this role, I was also a defense counsel, a litigator, and I am a specialist in admiralty law, although I do, I guess, a little bit of everything now that I'm in-house. But thank you very much for letting me be here today. I'm excited to be here.
Hi, I'm Xiaoyu Kaess, co-founder and COO of Aquatonomy. We create autonomous robotic solution to revolutionize underwater inspection of critical infrastructure. We are based in 3 different universities: Carnegie Mellon University, MIT, and the University of Michigan. We leverage the latest invention in these universities and bring them to the market quickly. Our robots operate in complex environments, in any visibility conditions, collecting data with minimal human intervention. And our data is displayed in the format of 3D, high-resolution 3D models, accurate for measurement. And this helps to unlock data, insights, and capabilities that are not available before. We use this, our products to transform how decisions are made for maintenance and extend asset service life.
Good afternoon. My name is Benjamin Allen. I'm with the law firm of Holland and Knight. I was at the General Counsel's office at the NTSB for a long time, primarily in charge of investigations and legal aspects of investigations. My practice now is mostly advising clients in all modes of transport, so aviation, maritime, rail, trucking, on preparing for emergencies, preparing for accidents, and responding to them.
Good afternoon. My name is Tracy Reynolds. I'm a commander in the United States Navy and also a uniformed attorney, a judge advocate in the Navy. I'm here in my personal capacity. Nothing that I say is should be imputed to the Department of the Navy or the Department of Defense. It is such an honor and privilege to be here up on this stage with all of these esteemed practitioners and thinkers. I'll have 19 years of military service in September, and most of my work is specific to risk mitigation and management in combat, ashore, and afloat.
Great, thank you. Well, I was excited and more than a little intimidated when Don asked me to moderate this panel, because as a knuckle-dragging pilot, I know nothing about maritime regulations. And I was really interested as I was looking through the resources and talking with the panelists, just how far maritime law goes back many thousands of years, but codified as we know it as recently as the 90s, and still being adapted today. And as we all know, the UAS industry and technology has a way of upsetting the apple cart and making what was established and secure not as either of those. One particularly intriguing issue was the duty to provide search and rescue at sea, which has been a foundational precept for centuries now. But how does that apply when there is no crew on the vessel? And how does that change, or does it change? Because it was not only a moral imperative, but a legal imperative now. And does that change? It's been very rewarding listening to everyone exchange ideas and reading your published works. So let's get started. Law Tech Connect has addressed this issue in the past, but for those like me that probably don't know much about the issue, we'll start by laying a foundation. So Ben, if you don't mind starting with you, and please, as you're doing this, hypothetically, let's just say people in the audience might not know anything about maritime law. Can you review this slide and kind of explain to us the territorial waters versus international waters and the various demarcations of that?
Sure. So territorial sea is anything, so countries can demarcate where the kind of the edge of their inland waters are. It's in the U.S. code. They'll say from this point to the seaward side of this point, and that's all kind of inland water. Outside of that, going out to 12 miles is what's known as territorial sea. The shore nation has jurisdiction there and can control pretty much everything that happens in that area. There's a contiguous zone which goes out another 12 miles, 24 miles from the coastline. They can exert some control there. The further you get out, the less control the shoreside nation has. Outside of that, going out to 200 miles is the exclusive economic zone. The shoreside country there can control undersea and below the seabed economic resources and harvesting of life in the sea, in the EEZ. And outside of that, there's actually another one out there that's the, what do they call it? The extended continental shelf that can go out to 350 miles. That's not on it. Oh, it is on there. Sorry, I didn't see that. And then outside of that is the high seas, which is international law. And then the flag state of the ship controls what happens on various vessels.
Thank you. Heather, what legal framework applies when you're operating in international waters?
So international waters are also the high seas, as they're known, and that's what's stated on the slide here. The framework that applies is exactly what you would expect. International waters don't belong to anyone, so every nation has the right to operate in any manner that they see fit, or let's say any peaceful manner. So that includes navigation, overflight, things like laying cables, fisheries, scientific research. You can do anything. The one caveat to that, I would say, is for any countries that are signatories and have ratified international conventions, like the International Maritime Organization, various conventions on pollution or safety of life at sea, then those technically also regulate the activities of vessels flying under those flags, although enforcement is always an issue in international waters. But the nutshell answer is that anything sort of goes, anything peaceful.
Thank you. So, Alan, Ben mentioned the territorial waters. Can you talk a little bit about what rules apply to that?
Yeah, so actually there's two sections here I'd like to address. One is landward of what's called the baseline. So what we're talking about is, as Ben said, the inland waters or internal waters of a nation. In the inland waters, a nation has complete sovereignty. They can basically do whatever they want with respect to ships. Could even exclude vessels from coming into their internal waters if they so choose. Now, generally, most coastal states apply not just their own rules, or that what they've done is they've taken the international conventions and they've harmonized them with their own internal laws. And the United States does this quite frequently. Some examples we'll talk about a little bit here later today are the collision regulations. There are international collision regulations. That's a convention, an IMO convention. The United States has essentially adopted those as their own inland rules with a couple of small technical modifications. some other rules that the United States has that are beyond what the international conventions require, some things to do with navigation and testing rudders, et cetera, on your ships. Then when you move from the inland waters into the territorial seas, you have the same laws, except the difference being that the coastal state can only enforce those laws that are in conformity with the UN's Law of the Sea Convention. There's a thing called a right of innocent passage. So even though you may have a U.S. law that requires a ship to do certain things when it's in its port or in its internal waters, it can't require that same thing of a ship that's just passing through the territorial sea as on innocent passage. And then, of course, you also have not quite internal or territorial waters, but as Ben was talking about, the contiguous zone, their ships are enforced in terms of things like customs, immigration, environmental regulations. Again, they all have to be essentially in conformance with the United Nations Law of the Sea Convention, but if they are, then the port state or the coastal state's entitled to enforce them.
Thank you. Now on to Tracy. As we all know, military operations are everywhere, often in areas where there's competing interests or even conflicting interpretations of the rules. So what legal framework does the military use?
I think that's a great question, and it really gets to the undergirding philosophies related to maritime law. The maritime environment is one in which technology has influenced legal development for, as you said earlier, hundreds of years. For example, the territorial waters line, prior to the UN Conventional Law of the Sea, territorial waters were measured by how far your cannon could shoot. So that's where the nautical mile limitations originated back before we had, geospatial positioning that could really dictate from the baseline exactly how far 12 nautical miles would be. And it was through that development of international law through treaty and convention that we ended up with territorial seas that were dictated by something other than technology. So the United States military and militaries in general will abide by those treaties that are in effect and will also take on board doctrinally elements of customary international law. Someone might have mentioned it previously, perhaps I missed it, but the United States is not a signatory to the UN Conventional Law of the Sea, but the bulk of the sections within it that are specific to navigational rights, how one moves throughout the international waters and in international airspace, because of course the Chicago Convention influenced UNCLOS and vice versa, that is part of military doctrine. So a failure to abide by those treaty obligations can result in a federal law violation through the Uniform Code of Military Justice if you have a watch standard that acts in violation of the rules of the road or in violation of the 1972 collisions regulations. But in general, whenever we are talking about international waters, the general duty of due regard, specifically meaning that as long as independent entities are operating in international waters in a way that doesn't negatively impact the lawful use of that same space by others so engaged, then everybody's acting right and within the complexities of the law. It's only when bad things happen, like when a military vessel collides with a civilian vessel, not that that ever happens, right? But it does indeed happen. Or if one of your aircraft falls off the side of the vessel, whenever you start having to really think hard about what other legal obligations come to play.
Thank you. Now, Ben, on to you. Tracy covered the military aspects. So how about how the laws apply to commercial vehicles? Or vessels, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, what last thing you said?
Vessels, not vehicles.
Vessels.
Yeah.
Vehicles are vessels, but vessels aren't vehicles.
Potato.
So it depends on where you are. As Alan was kind of saying, in the territorial sea, it's the shoreside nation. They get to apply their laws there. In the contiguous zone, it is really just for customs and pollution and things like that. Economic exclusive zone, they get to control exploitation of resources under the sea and on the seabed and under the seabed. So think oil, natural gas, things like that. And the shoreside nation in the economic zone gets to control what gets built as far as, subsea structures and things like that for wind farms or mineral exploitation under the seabed, things like that. So it's similar in the sense that, as you go further from the shoreline, the laws of the shoreside countries kind of diminish the further out you get.
And then Xiaoyu, over to you. So of the panel, you're the one that actually has to do the thing to try to move your company forward. You're headquartered out of Pittsburgh, but what sort of legal regimes have you had to navigate as you've been trying to grow your company and establish in the marketplace? And what rules applied? What organizations have you had to work with? And have you had to consult with attorneys? Tell us a little about that pathway.
Yeah, thank you for the question. As I mentioned before, that we focus on infrastructure inspection, and most of that work takes place in inland waters. That means that our operations are primarily governed by domestic law. That said, we've learned that sometimes maritime law can extend into inland waters. For example, navigable inland waterways connected to the seas sometimes fall under inland maritime law, especially when it comes to commercial shipping. And in the case of international waters, such as the Great Lakes, there can be a shared governance framework and treaty obligations in place. And so if we haven't yet, but if we operate in the Great Lakes, we will need to know, for example, which set of environmental law applies, because that's the key for us to comply. So although we haven't had the need to navigate maritime law, but equipping ourselves with necessary legal knowledge is a very critical step of creating a responsible practice.
Thank you. All right. So now that we have somewhat of a baseline, we'd like to move on to defining the technology a little bit more. So the depths of the rivers, seas, and oceans are, thank you for this, Dawn, swimming with maritime autonomous surface ships, uncrewed underwater vehicles, and remotely operated vehicles. So, Alan, can you give a quick overview of the types of vehicles that are operating?
An overview might be a little difficult because there is a proliferation. Let me start here. Oh, yes. Okay. So the first thing you have to talk about when you talk about the proliferation of autonomous vessels is, one, what degree of autonomy. And the IMO has settled, at least temporarily, hopefully permanently, on these 0 through 5 levels of autonomy, with 0 being essentially no autonomous operations and 5 being the case where there is no crew in it, completely driven by a vessel is completely driven by artificial intelligence. The second thing you have to grapple with when you're talking about this is a very fundamental question: is what is a vessel? That's a question that keeps coming up over and over again. I would hope that by now it had been settled, but a lot of developers are hoping that say, well, what I have isn't a vessel, so none of these rules have to apply to me because all the rules apply to vessels. And that's probably short-sighted and isn't going to get you very far. So now we have, at least in terms of definitions, the IMO has come up with their idea that everything on the surface will be considered a maritime autonomous surface ship. And that would encompass things like big cargo ships that are operating autonomously to little tiny workboats and survey platforms. And there's a company that does something called a sail drone, which is essentially a sailboat-powered little mini survey boat that can use sail power to go across the ocean and take oceanographic measurements. All those things are essentially considered by the IMO to be MAS, or maritime autonomous surface ships of some sort. Then we have ships, vessels that intentionally sink, as opposed to unintentionally, which is something I sometimes have to deal with. Those are the autonomous underwater vehicles. And again, you have a lot of different terminology. They can be called AUVs for autonomous underwater vehicles, UUVs for uncrewed underwater vehicles, but they're all meaning the same thing. Basically, something that submerges and does whatever it has to do while it's submerged. A third category, which isn't really an autonomous vessel so much as a work platform, would be, as you mentioned, ROVs or remotely operated vehicles. These are things that generally can use autonomous features, but are generally tethered to the surface. So don't really consider them within the autonomous vessel realm. And then finally, a very somewhat recent development are what we call transitional types of vessels. This is something that operates on the surface, leaves from port, and then can submerge, and then maybe even can launch a UAV from its, when it comes back to the surface, launch a UAV. Recently, there was in the news where the Chinese had developed a 40 or 50 knot surface vessel that can then submerge for up to 60 days and remain submerged for 60 days. Ostensibly, this is an oceanographic and meteorological research vessel, although I think immediately you can see the military applications that are possible with something like this.
Thank you. So Heather, you mentioned quite a few different types of vehicles. Can you explain a little bit about the proliferation of the different types and use cases?
Sure. Yeah. Naturally, coming from industry, I have a lot more information about what's going on in the private sector than in the governmental and military sector. But there was a study done a few years ago that said that there were some 1,000 plus mass vessels operating in the world. And I find that number to be a little high from what we know about the industry. And we've only got to assume that that number includes vessels with any amount of automation. So there are a lot of vessels that are still manned, but that have some automation, some sort of automatic capabilities, such as automatic collision avoidance. I think those have probably been lumped in because when we look at the types of vessels and vehicles or equipment that Alan was mentioning before, the numbers are a lot smaller still. Alan mentioned ROVs, remotely operated vehicles. As you mentioned, those are usually tethered via an umbilical, and they're deployed from either ships or USVs or whatnot. But that's not really new technology for us. That technology has been around for ages, and it doesn't quite fit the definition of mass. So maritime autonomous surface ship, which is sort of a misnomer because it also includes remotely operated vehicles. But AUVs, autonomous underwater vehicles, are something that fit the definition of mass. That was one of the things that Alan mentioned, sinks. So this is something that's not tethered. It truly is autonomous. The person who's operating it will input a survey path. They're typically used for surveys. Fugro employs them very frequently. And then it goes on its mission. And after it's done with its mission, then it comes back to the surface and the data is collected from the nose of the beast. They kind of look like little underwater torpedoes. And we are aware of maybe 50 of them that are operating worldwide right now. Again, that's in the commercial sector, but certainly we're not reaching those 1,000 marks with those. As respects surface vehicles, Fugro operates what we call USVs, uncrewed surface vessels. So these are vessels, but they don't have people on board. Some of our models, we have 5 models currently. Oh, yes, we've got some photographs of them. So 2 of the photographs, the one on the top left and then the one on the right, are of our uncrewed surface vessels. I selected the one on the top left just so you could see sort of how it's deployed. So that one is in port. It's just been put back together because it can be shipped on like in containers or on a flatbed. And on the right, that's a pretty recent photo from Brazil where we're currently operating, and I just thought it was pretty. But neither of those vessels have people on them, although some of our models have the ability to have a person on board in case of an emergency. But we have currently in operation only 6, and we're the industry leader in these. So these aren't huge numbers, but there is a huge international demand for these. We're seeing a lot of demand from clients in both the public and the private sector. In terms of other industry players, including Fugro's 6, almost 7, because we have one coming out soon, there are maybe 10 USVs operating, and these guys are capable of doing things like hydrographic surveying, geophysical surveying. Our models can tow sensors, so they're a little larger, usually 12 to 24 meters long, and they can actually take coring samples, so we do geotechnical testing, just a wide variety of things, including pipeline inspections, so existing infrastructure inspections, sub-bottom inspections. And actually, we can do, with our deployable ROVs, some minor repairs underwater, so pretty cool stuff. And then Alan mentioned also that there's a company that's operating some sail drones, and there are maybe 20 that they're operating. So again, not huge numbers. I think everyone's probably interested in the what's sort of the boogeyman in the industry, which is fully autonomous, large-scale vessels. And again, there just aren't very many that are currently operating. You might remember in 2020, there was a very large vessel that was deployed out of Norway, Yara Birkeland, and that made the news. I mean, it's still making the news, but there haven't been a lot that have hit the market since, particularly in the private sector. The U.S. Navy has 2, and we are aware that some other governments are operating some, but just a handful. But industry is actively working on developing more for use as ferries, for use in harbors, inland waterways to move cargo. So this is real and it's coming. It's going to be coming at us pretty quickly now as things are starting to roll.
Great. Thank you. Tracy, over to you. Heather covered the commercial aspects. Could you touch on DoD or dual use that you're seeing, or if there's any differences?
Thank you. This is one of those areas where it's difficult not to see the dual use because there is not a clear demarcation between the technologies that are appropriate for civilian uses and then those that also have military purpose. And again, like the maritime environment involving, from a legal perspective, over many, many years, that's how wartime capabilities are as well. I mean, you can use a hammer for a whole lot of things. And depending on what mission you're trying to accomplish at that moment, it's not the hammer that's changing, it's the way that you're using it. There has been a lot of technological innovations in the Navy in particular that have been less successful than we would have liked, like the littoral combat ship might be something that folks in the audience are familiar with. But there's conversations ongoing about whether autonomous modules on board an LCS might be a way to perhaps give a little bit of extra life to that particular platform. And I think that that's what we're going to be seeing a little bit more of in the future, is leveraging technologies with the platforms that are currently in existence in order to take advantage of technological innovations. There was a $986 million contract recently awarded that was specific to autonomy in the underway environment. I think there are about 88 contractors on that particular contract, and I was trying to look it up on my phone to be able to actually have more details for you because I have it on my computer that's sitting over there on top of that table in the back, so I'm sorry about that. But there's been a lot of common themes throughout the course of the day, which is part of the value of going towards the end. The things that will continue are the things that were mentioned earlier in the day about managing risk. Because this is a dynamic environment from a regulatory perspective, that's not going to stop. But managing the risk is going to be pervasive, whether or not the regulations are clear or the third and fourth order effects of those choices are clear. And if you can use it in the civilian sector, chances are you can use it in the military sector as well. And it's always difficult to get numbers, as my colleague expressed. Sometimes they look high because of how things are defined. Sometimes there's things that are happening that may or may not be part of public knowledge. But the demand signal for this is not going to go away. Part of my work at Second Fleet was specific to the Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier, trying to ensure that these new technologies still allow us to capture the wind envelope so that we can launch and recover aircraft. Those types of considerations are ongoing as it relates to uncrewed aerial vessels, as well as surface and subsurface vessels as well, to take control of that water column.
Thank you. Ben, could you explain a little bit about these levels of autonomy that for this?
Sure. Well, we kind of talked about it a little bit.
Yeah.
But, so they range from no automation at all, a typical ship, to a system like automatic steering and things like that, where you still have a crew of seafarers, but certain tasks have been automated on the ship. Think of it as a basic cruise control in your car would be like a level 1 automation on a ship. Often they're the things that are dull, dirty, and dangerous. Automation of engine room functions and things like that. So that would be like level 1. Level 2, well, I guess that's actually more like, I have like 4. This one divides it into 6. Then there's the ones where you can have remotely operated ships, so you still have a human in the loop, but the functions of the ship primarily are automated. You can have those still with seafarers on board, either as safety operators or they are doing other functions on the ship, but some of it, the operation of the ship, the navigation of the ship can be automated. You can also have remotely operated ships where there's nobody on board. It's just cargo or whatever the ship is carrying, and there's no human beings on board. And then the highest level, of course, is there's no human in the loop at all. It's the ship is told sail from here to there, and it sails from there to there, and there's nobody, no living human being in that process at all. After the pre-programming of that's where you're going, here's the route you should take, and then you press go and it goes, that's the goal.
Xiaoyu, over to you. Aquatonomy, you're building autonomous maritime vehicles. Could you tell us a little bit about them and how they're different than traditional vessels, or what makes them autonomous using that level of autonomy we were just talking about?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of underwater vehicles, the level of autonomy are very similar to what's described here for surface vessels. So maybe just a little bit of an overview of the autonomy on underwater vehicles. As mentioned before, ROVs or remotely operated vehicles are traditionally completely manually operated, so that's level 0. But we see more and more ROVs gaining level 1 autonomy, that is basic level automation. For example, holding the depth holding. That means that the vehicle can automatically function at a specific depth while the vehicle can still move along other dimensions. That simplifies the pilot's work. And level 2 partial autonomy, that's when we see the underwater survey vehicles following predefined paths. They are partial autonomy because the paths are predefined. And then level 3, conditional autonomy, that is where Aquatonomy's vehicles are functioning at. So this means that our systems can automatically or can autonomously make decisions in predefined boundaries, such as planning the path autonomously to make sure that all of the surfaces within the boundary are covered for inspection purposes, and obstacle avoidance is carried out as well. And this is just the right level of autonomy for infrastructure inspection, because the infrastructure customers really desire to be kept in the loop, to be informed of where the vehicle is, how the operations are going, and have the opportunity to provide intervention when they see fit. So they don't want to be left out of the loop. So this is the right level of autonomy for our specific use case. And level 4 high autonomy, those vehicles are mainly designed for long distance navigation, and carrying out tasks in very remote and sometimes in deep areas where instant communication or frequent communication with the pilot is not feasible. And therefore, autonomy is a necessity. And we see remote research vehicles and some of the defense applications and subsea inspection of pipelines. That's happening in that level. At level 5, complete autonomy. As far as I know, there's no commercial application, commercial vehicles that are available functioning at that level. So that's the overview of. And despite which level of autonomy a vehicle functions at, there's some commonality there. There's no onboard crew, and except level 1, all other levels have some level of machine decision making based on algorithm, based on sensor data, and algorithms interpreting the sensor data. And they're all software driven operations. And so that completely changes the traditional definition of maritime vessels. And of course, that's why we're here discussing how that impacts the legal framework.
Heather, back to you. One of your company's missions is to protect our oceans and their surrounding environments. So could you tell a little bit more about the autonomous vehicles used to do that? Kind of, again, talking about how they differentiate from traditional vessels using that level of autonomy.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this question because I get to brag on my company, and it feels nice to work for a company who's devoted to protecting the natural environment. And Fugro is, from the top down, committed to protecting the natural environment, in particular the marine environment. In fact, the company is devoted to net carbon neutrality by 2050, which is far ahead of industry, projections or commitments from other companies. So we have an integrated approach to do that, and have found that the bulk of our carbon emissions are coming from our marine operations. Of course, we have land operations as well, but we have a sizable fleet internationally, both owned and chartered vessels, and vessels pollute a lot, for lack of a better way to put it. So we are working over the next, decades to retrofit our existing vessels with either hybrid batteries or by doing methanol conversions. But a huge pillar of this program, and something that's really going to make it work for us, is using these uncrewed surface vessels. We're so committed to using this technology, actually, that we just purchased the manufacturer a couple of years ago. It's a company called Seakit. It's now part of Fugro, and we now are responsible for the design, construction, all the way to operation of our USVs. So it's pretty exciting stuff. As to your question of what is the same and what is different from our traditional fleet, I'd say everything is the same and everything's different. And that's the great thing about the USVs. We have 4 models, 5 actually that we own. 4 were designed by us, 1 by Thayer Mahan. But these vessels are capable of doing over 80% of what our traditional fleet can do in terms of the services that we provide our clients, but they use 95% less fuel. That's a huge carbon savings right there. And that doesn't even go to the human aspect of it, which is supremely important to us, particularly to me as someone who has litigated in the admiralty realm. Working offshore is dangerous. And if we can keep people from going offshore by using them in our shoreside remote operation centers where they're still operating vessels, they're just doing it from a safe location, then we're all for that. So these vessels are doing the same. So it's this, that they have all of the things that you would expect a normal vessel to have: AIS, ECDIS, VHF radio, 360-degree cameras, all of the things. But they are not polluting, and they don't require people to be in danger.
Thank you. Okay, now we'll transition on to the top 5 issues. As we mentioned and have talked about all day, this is truly disruptive technology in lots of areas. But to go through the first 5, okay, I'd like to start out with Alan with the crewing requirements, because most of the regulations assume that there's at least one person on board. So what challenges does that present when regulation doesn't keep up with technology?
Well, by definition, an uncrewed vessel can't meet the minimum number of crew on board. As it was just said, there are certain U.S. regulations actually require a certain number of people on board. U.S. statutory regulations, statutes, and international conventions are the same way. So there's basically three, as I say, call them workarounds, and you can either develop a vessel that's not within a category that requires crew, and there's some in the United States. I call this the exclusion principle. You exclude certain vessels by statute. For example, many uninspected vessels, there's no specific crew requirement for them. Oil spill response vessels can be exempted from the minimum crew requirement. Military vessels, although the military follows a lot of the international rules, they're not required to have any crew on board. They're not governed by U.S. statute in terms of the required crew. So you can develop a vessel that's excluded. You can also do what's called equivalence. The Coast Guard, actually, this is one area where the Coast Guard does recognize the ability to minimize a crew. And it's a concept that's included within SOLAS, where you can designate autonomous equipment to reduce the number of crew. That doesn't get you an uncrewed vessel, but it takes you maybe from a crew that was required to be 5 to maybe a crew that's 2. Also, in terms of just equivalence, you can also start to implement what's called the remote operations center concept, where ships are not operated by the crew itself, it's operated by a remote center. And at the moment, you can do that in the United States and help reduce the crew. Again, you still can't quite eliminate the crew yet. The final way is to just get an exemption from regulations. This is sort of the most common method that's being used today to go to a completely uncrewed vessel. Several countries have implemented regulations where they have exempted their ships operating in their waters from their regulations. The way it was done in the United States is probably one of the most interesting ways, and that is that SpaceX, you may know that they operate a completely autonomous launch recovery barge. And they did this by going to Congress and getting an exemption to the statutory regulations for minimum crew written into the National Defense Authorization Act in 2023. So it's the same kind of thing that's been done in some other countries like the UK, Netherlands, and Canada.
Thank you. Now, Tracy, I'd like to ask you a little bit about navigation rules and collision avoidance. Most of these regulations are written with the assumption of a human in the loop making the decisions. So as we go up that level of autonomy, how can those autonomous vehicles comply with when that autonomy might make a different decision than human might?
That's really the $5,000 question, isn't it? As a military practitioner, my first question to decision makers is, what are they trying to do? What are they trying to accomplish? Because once we have in mind what mission success looks like, then the decision maker can balance the associated risk of being in compliance or not being in compliance with whatever it is that we're talking about. Now, as my colleague had previously discussed, getting yourself written into the NDAA as an accepted vessel is a really good workaround if that's the type of juice that you can squeeze out of your specific congressperson. Not every company has that option. So perhaps that choice isn't available for everyone. But mission accomplishment is often an accepted rule or basis for an exemption from a regulatory requirement. And an example of that is the use of AIS. So a merchant vessel would think it's absolutely crazy pants to turn off your AIS when you're in a traffic scheme. You wouldn't do that as a merchant vessel, and if you did it, you would be out of compliance for your insurance purposes, for contractual obligations. The list goes on and on. Vessels that are military sovereign vessels engaged in a military purpose, like a gray hull, a destroyer, or a cruiser, or an aircraft carrier, for mission purposes, accomplishments can turn off their AIS if they deem that it is operationally required in that moment to take that action. And that is a risk that is balanced by the commanding officer that's closest to that decision making at that time. And it's something that happens as dictated by whether the charts are accurate, the amount of traffic that is observed visually or through any other sensor collection. Maritime domain awareness is something I think everyone on this panel is familiar with and is a key component to risk mitigation in the moment as you're navigating any particular area, whether you are on the surface, in the water column, or on the seabed and engaged in activities there. So, as a military practitioner, I have never in my 19 years advised that someone follow regulation to the detriment of a platform or of a human being or of mission accomplishment. But I don't get paid the big bucks to make decisions, they do. Because my goal as the advising attorney is to ensure that the decision maker knows the third and fourth order effects of the choices that they're going to make. And there may be circumstances where taking the regulatory hit is preferable to not being able to accomplish the mission, taking on damage to a platform that costs $1 million or losing human life. And that's really what gets us to why the law is important as it relates to these specific technologies. We are fortunate because we practice law in an environment grounded in common law. We listen to facts, we come up with rules, we apply the rules to the facts, and if it sucks, then we come up with different rules. We aren't part of a civil system where the mindless application of rule sets that can result in harm to mission, human life, or a platform is just what we do. I mean, that's not what we do. I don't know if anybody watches Steve Colbert, but when they talk about due process being the process that you do, I mean, but it is kind of what we are doing in a common law environment. And it's exciting because we've been able to see in the maritime environment, definitions of law go from how far my cannon can shoot to what commonly situated nation states decide should be territorial waters to what makes sense for the technological application of decisions that are made in the moment by mariners, and the risk is managed both by companies ashore and individuals that are aboard. So did I just give the longest attorney weeble wobble answer ever that really boils down to maybe and perhaps, and it's based on the facts? Yes, I did. But I think that's a feature and not a bug, because as this legal framework continues to develop and as the technology continues to develop, these are the types of decisions that we need to make.
Thank you. So we've only got about 10 minutes remaining, so I'd like to move over to Xiaoyu, to give, and we'll let Heather follow up with, can you go through some real case studies that you've had or experienced, conflicts or friction because of this?
Well, fortunately, we haven't had to navigate complex legal situations. Probably because underwater, there's not a whole lot of traffic, and we operate in zones that have restricted in-water activities. But I want to bring in some of the thoughts from a technologist point of view. As technologists, we see autonomy not only as a challenge to existing legal framework, but also as a catalyst for meaningful progress. As innovators, we build autonomous systems to make operations safer, more efficient, and very often reaching areas that were difficult, dangerous, or too costly to reach. But we recognize that technology doesn't exist in a vacuum. And the legal framework around it need to provide guidance and safety to people operating and being impacted by it. So when legal professionals and innovators, technologies work together early, we don't just respond to changes, we also shape a future where autonomy, safety, and trust go hand in hand. And so that's why I think that this conversation, this dialogue is really meaningful. And this is a great time, exciting time to have this discussion.
Heather, how about you?
So contrary to my colleague, we unfortunately have had a lot of regulatory and legal hurdles to jump through. The company has been operating USVs for several years now, and in several jurisdictions all over the world. So we're operating in the United Kingdom, Norway, the Netherlands, looking at France and Belgium, Brazil, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Australia, just sort of all over the place. And as you can imagine, all of those countries have different laws and different certification requirements and different methods for achieving things. But the one thing that they all had in common when we started working with them was that none of them had a mass code. So none of them had any regulations that were specific to uncrewed systems, which is what we're operating. So we had the challenge, and we still do, by the way, have this challenge because most jurisdictions still don't have codes. With every new country that we want to operate in, we have to approach that country, their regulators, whoever they are. We have to identify them and approach them early, really with early engagement, and figure out what their expectations are, what their requirements are. But the real challenge is that those countries do not know what their expectations and challenges and requirements are yet because they don't have any codes. So we're working with them sort of through a collaborative but tedious, extensive process of really teaching them about our operations, but also gaining their trust, showing them that our operations are safe. And a lot of times we're using processes like Alan mentioned, of equivalences. So the MCA in the United Kingdom is a really good case study for us because that was a huge bear. If you know anything about Admiralty law, you know the MCA is very well regarded, but the United Kingdom is not a flag of convenience, and they were requiring their flag to operate in their country. So it was a huge undertaking, and they now do have a mass code, by the way, but when we started working with them, they did not. So we had to prove to them through a program I think they call novel compliance. It's maybe MGN 664. It's similar to the design basis agreement process here in the States. We had to prove to them that we could meet the requirements of a manned vessel through equivalences. So the easiest example I think to give would be the lookout rule, which is a rule in international law and domestic law in every country that the practices on the water. And that's that there has to be someone, a human, looking out and making sure that the vessel that they're on is not going to collide with anything, anybody, that there isn't, an endangered whale, or I don't know, that was a silly example, but there's a physical person on board, right? So how can our vessel that doesn't have any people satisfy that rule? And we convinced or explained to the MCA in the United Kingdom that our vessel is equipped with 360-degree cameras, and they have night vision and all of the technological capabilities. And we were able to show them that we could satisfy that requirement. And that's in lieu, of course, of there being a code specifically for uncrewed and autonomous vessels that eliminates that requirement or that states it in a different way. So it's always a challenge, and it will continue to be probably until 2032, which is when the IMO is currently slated to publish its standards for mass. And if they stick with that deadline, fingers crossed, then perhaps it's not looking likely. But should we get some standards sometimes in the 2030s, then we expect to see a slew of countries just sort of falling in and adopting the standards the IMO has set.
Right. Thank you. So Don's starting to throw daggers at me. So we're coming up on the end of our time. So starting with Alan over here, I'd like everyone to spend about 30 seconds. And for those of us that stayed here, and not only stayed here, but stayed awake, what do you want them to take away from this, and how can they get a hold of you?
Okay, you can get a hold of me through our website, blankrome.com. My email is alan.weigel@blankrome.com, and like everyone, I'm on LinkedIn. The one thing to take away is understand that if you're going to operate or you want to develop an autonomous vessel, truly autonomous, uncrewed vessel in the United States, the United States Coast Guard is not going to change their regulations anytime in the next 10 years. So one way to do that is to do the approach that SpaceX did and get something written into a Defense Authorization Act or a Coast Guard Authorization Act to give your technology some kind of an exemption from current statutes.
Again, I'm Heather Trosclair. You guys can find me probably most easily on LinkedIn, and I'm really happy to connect with anyone and everyone. And I guess one thing to take away is just to keep an eye on the industry. I know most of you guys are like pilots and are here with more knowledge about drone technology than maritime technology, but there's some really cool stuff happening in the space. And surprisingly, the laws that govern maritime issues and issues in the air are surprisingly similar. So yeah, thank you.
One thing to take away is that autonomy is changing what's possible at sea. With it is the legal framework that support safe and responsible innovation. And so let's continue to have this discussion, not just here, but also continuously after the event. And you can find me on LinkedIn. Welcome to connect with me. I will be really happy to share more about what our company is doing.
And again, I'm Benjamin Allen. You can find me on LinkedIn as well, or on our law firm's website, benjamin.allen@hklaw.com. I'm happy to connect with anyone as well. I guess my takeaway, since I'm in the preparation for bad days world, is be paying attention to all of these things as they're evolving. It's an exciting time in the industry, both in the air and on the sea and under the sea. So be thinking about what happens when things don't go right, and how are you going to prepare for that in this brave new world of autonomous vehicles everywhere.
Thank you for spending this hour with me. My name is Tracy Reynolds, and you can find me through LinkedIn and also through Autonomy Global. And it's my privilege to work with Dawn in that area. And my major takeaway for you all is a Mike Tyson quote: "Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth." And that is what risk mitigation is really about. Situational awareness, making the best decision that you can, trying to understand the third and fourth order effects of the choices that you make. And if you don't know, just do your best.
Thank you, everyone. A round of applause for our panelists, please. And we'll be starting the next one shortly.